Gentlemen, I don't know whether we are going to make history tomorrow, but at any rate, we shall change geography. These are the words spoken by General Charles Harington on the eve of the Battle of Messines. This was in anticipation of the detonation of 19 mines filled with almost £1 million of explosives. Despite the explosion taking place in Belgium, it was so loud that it was heard in London, and it resulted in thousands of German casualties. In today's video, we will cover the devastating explosion of the Battle of Messines and the horrors of the Underground War. It is perhaps helpful to start with a brief explanation of the situation in 1917. The First World War Western Theatre saw trench warfare and often little movement on the front lines. One of the key locations was around the Belgian city of Ypres. German defensive lines held back British and French advances for years. One notable tactic to help with the deadlock was the use of mining enemy positions. This saw mines dug under the ground and under defensive positions. These mines would then be filled with explosives and detonated to devastating effect. As the battles raged on above, sappers, miners, and engineers fought battles underneath the ground. Many of these men fighting this underground war were civilian coal miners, experienced in working underground. It was as early as 1914 that the first mines were dug. German engineers dug and detonated the first mines against British trenches. This in turn led to the formation of the Royal Engineer Tunnelling Companies. British Major, Member of Parliament and Engineer John Norton Griffiths offered his clay-kicking miners who had been digging out the sewers in northern England to the war effort. In turn, Britain called to its overseas dominions to form their own tunnelling companies. In all, around 33 tunnelling companies were employed on the Western Front. Clay kicking was a quieter method of mining. It is a technique that uses the power of the legs to dig through clay-based soil. It makes the discovery of the mines harder, whilst allowing the tunnellers to hear any German tunnelling operatives. Clay kicking also proved to be 4 times faster in the firm clay conditions on the Western Front, but it was a difficult task for the miners. It involved one miner called the kicker. They would be supported and use their feet to pierce the clay with a sharp spade called a grafting spade, or sometimes even a bayonet. There would be another miner called the bagger, who would bag up the clay and pass it to the third miner, the trammer, who would transfer the clay back to the entrance via a trolley. The roles would be switched during the often 6-hour shifts, working in cramped, dangerous conditions. It could take months to dig a mine using this technique, but their value when combined with major offences was clear. Danger would also present from opposing mines dug, aiming to collapse attempts to reach the German positions. Countermines would be dug and explosives placed near enemy mines wherever they were found. Many of the clay kickers did not use nails or screws to help support their tunnels in a bid to avoid detection by the enemy. Instead, they relied on natural swelling of the clay to maintain the structure of the mines. Though this was not always guaranteed. There was always the risk of collapse and death by suffocation. There was even the dangers of chemical weapons and gas seeping and sinking into the mines. Allied tunnellers would need to be aware of any nearby German mines. This would see one of the miners left below with a stethoscope pressed against the wall. They would listen out for any Germans mining or talking. There was even the danger of 2 mines meeting, leading to a brutal hand-to-hand fighting between German and Allied miners, in the cramped darkness of the underground. If such engagements took place, it was rare that guns would be used, rather knives, shovels, and fists. The mines to destroy the German positions at Messines were devised in September of 1915 and were approved in January of the following year. The goal was to take the ridge at Messines, putting the Allies well placed to launch their offensive to the northeast towards Passchendaele. British, Canadian and Australian engineers worked to create a total of 26 mines across a 10-mile front line. 7 of these would not be fired or they were abandoned after discovery by German countermines. One would even remain dormant until 1955, when it was detonated during a lightning storm. An electricity pylon was unknowingly built over this mine, which was struck by lightning, causing the detonation of around 26,000 pounds of explosives. The explosion left a massive crater, and remarkably, the only casualty was an unfortunate cow. The mines were as deep as 120 feet and up to 2,000 meters long. The mines would be filled with tens of thousands of pounds of explosives. The German forces were well aware of the possibility and dangers of mining, but they mistakenly believed that the threat had been neutralized by their own countermining. Some in the German command believed that their position in Messines ought to be abandoned as they were vulnerable to attack from all three sides, but instead they believed that their extensive defences would protect their position. The German command did reduce the numbers of frontline troops at Messines, but there was no ultimate withdrawal. In the early morning hours of the 7th of June 1917, the British artillery ceased firing. This created an eerie silence, when all of a sudden 19 mines were detonated within the space of only 20 seconds. The sound of the explosion was reportedly heard as far away as London, about 170 miles away. The shock waves caused by the explosion were even mistakenly registered as an earthquake by the Geology Department of Lille University. The explosions tore through the German defence, throwing dirt, mud and debris into the air. Pillars of flame and smoke erupted as British soldiers waited for the order to attack. One person who witnessed the explosion was the British artillery officer Ralph Hamilton. First, there was a double shock that shook the earth like a gigantic earthquake. I was nearly flung off my feet. Then, an immense wall of fire seemed to go halfway up to heaven. The whole country was lit with a red light, like in a photographic darkroom. For those German soldiers not immediately killed or injured in the explosion, they were left stunned and terrified of what had just happened. Many were left psychologically shaken and damaged by the massive explosion. The crater left behind by the explosion was 50 feet deep and is said to have been the largest man-made pre-atomic explosion. The figure often quoted for those killed in the initial explosion is around 10,000. This figure relates to 10,000 missing as stated by German official history. It is likely that hundreds died in the detonation of the mines and many more killed by the subsequent artillery. Field Marshal Herbert Plummer is credited in masterminding the subsequent attack on Messines Ridge. Thousands of Allied artillery guns soon opened fire, using aircraft reconnaissance to locate and destroy German artillery. A creeping barrage protected the advancing British infantry during the attack against the devastated German positions. But such was the force of the explosion that some of the Allied troops waiting to attack were concussed by the blast. Within only a matter of hours, some 7,000 German soldiers were captured, making up the vast majority of the 10,000 missing. The Allied forces held off German counterattacks with relative ease, ensuring they maintained their gains. With the Messines Ridge captured, the Allies could turn their attention to the breakout from Ypres. This ginormous explosion, however, marked the end of large-scale offensive mining operations in the First World War. Instead, the focus was on defensive tactics. Engineers and miners were instead employed to build enormous underground systems of accommodations, headquarters, and subways to aid the war effort. The image one thinks of the First World War is of trench warfare and the horrors of muddy conditions, but what is often not thought about is of the horrors beneath the mud. For those men who dug in silence, their contributions are often not remembered, but it is vital that we do not forget those who fought in such a disturbing manner.